Hello, welcome to CSG's webinar series. My name is Bryden Ross, and I'm the Director of Energy and Environmental Policy at CSG's headquarters office in Lexington, Kentucky. Today's event, Restoring the Mississippi River Watershed, will highlight a state-led initiative called the Big River Works program started by Illinois Governor Pat Quinn and Louisiana Lieutenant Governor Dardenne, which seeks to bring together the river's diverse stakeholders in the agriculture, manufacturing, and natural resources development sectors, as well as environmental protection groups and other NGOs, in a forum to share strategies and outline opportunities to improve cooperation and improve sustainability in the entire watershed. Today's presenter during our webinar will be Valsin Marmillion, who currently is the Managing Director of the American Wetlands Foundation, which raises awareness of the impacts of Louisiana's wetland loss and seeks to increase support for efforts to conserve and save coastal areas. Mr. Marmillion has served as an executive producer for numerous broadcast programs, including several features developed by the Discovery and Learning Channel. In addition, he's spent several years in private sector public relations management and has significant congressional sector experience. Before we get started, I wanted to mention a few logistic points, and we'll begin today's program. First, all participants will be in listen-only mode, but we encourage you to submit questions for our speaker as you have them in the chat section on the webinar. We'll have our Q&A session will end after the presentation. I'll read questions aloud on a first-come, first-served basis. I'll be happy to forward along any questions you may have once the webinar is concluded. We provided Val's contact information as well and encourage you to reach out to him directly after today's session. With that, I'll turn it over to you, Val.
Well, thank you very much, and thanks to CSG for hosting this series. Today we're going to talk with each other about the biggest issue in America that never gets talked about, and that's this huge artery in the middle of our country called the Mississippi, and what's happening to the Mississippi River over time that is challenging so many different sectors with the issues of water quality, water demand, water access, clean water, clean air, the ability for the commercial aspects of agriculture, navigation, transportation, ecosystem management, and water management to merge before it's too late and take on some of the challenges that the Mississippi River poses. It's a third largest river system in the world. It is a river that is responsible for somewhat of 60% or more of the nation's economy and drives really some of our largest producers of goods and services and commodities, but also is the linchpin for jobs up and down the Mississippi Valley and the tributaries, which comprise 31 states and 2 Canadian provinces. So our listeners and our participants today can feel in some way that this issue touches each of the legislators and legislative staff and extensions of those into the agencies in a very prime way. When I said it's one of the largest issues that we rarely talk about, in fact, in the recent EPA, federal EPA appropriations, because the system doesn't have any authority or any compact working together, you can't find appropriations really to the health of the river system as a whole. And there may be piecemeal programs in the upper middle or southern or delta parts of the river, but there's nothing that sustains the entire river as an ecosystem. And as we all know, an ecosystem doesn't really operate by political bounds, which many of our decisions are made around the boundaries of states, provinces, and counties and legislative and senatorial districts. So we're going to try to look in this presentation beyond that. And where I'd like to start, if we can move to our next slide, is the establishment of this America's Wetland Foundation. And although it was established in Louisiana by Louisiana Governor in 2002, the purpose of the foundation was to build and alert the nation to coastal land loss and the degradation of the systems that are supported by the Mississippi Delta. And we've really been serving as a neutral arbiter to bring together diverse interests, because When the foundation was created, it was created with an industry president and a president of an NGO standing side by side with this governor, and since that time the foundation has been supported in a nonpartisan way by governors of both parties in Louisiana. The programs of the foundation yield important information tying the environment to commerce and to the economy. And as obvious as that seems, in most programs that you will find and most cooperative ventures that you will find, not all parties are at the table. And this issue is so big, we find that it's really critical to have a nonpartisan approach, but also a very diverse approach to its solutions if we're going to get there. The next slide, please. So how do you have a balanced dialogue, and you can call that meeting? Quite frankly, we have worked very hard to have stakeholders in these coastal land loss and system degradation issues identified. All these voices around a table, and we prefer a format for consensus building that convenes really high-level leaders in a leadership forum, and from that forum, if individuals do not agree with something that's being brought up, they have to pull it off the table. So it's sort of looking at the glass half full rather than half empty, and if you want to constrain the dialogue or to stop something from going forward because of your own particular special interest, you have to make a case for that in these considerations. So in that whole process, we have executive briefings and public events. We do polling. We create large-scale reports that we have just, similar to one we just released in Washington, D.C., called the Blue Ribbon Resilient Communities Project, and I'll explain a little more about that. And then we do international program by convening similar ecosystems and economic zones around the world to try to learn from best practices so that in a tight economy we can take advantage of studies and other activities that have happened in different parts of the world. Consequently, we held the first World Delta Dialogues in 2010 in New Orleans, and we'll hold a second one in 2013 in Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam, where we look at the Mississippi watershed as compared to the Mekong Delta watershed and other major watersheds of the world, seeing what's going on that is of common linkage and what kind of solutions are being brought to bear on problems that we could tap into or piggyback on so that we can leverage those solutions that have been created for our benefit. We also are very much involved in responding to crisis, whether it be the Deepwater Horizon oil spill or hurricanes or tornadoes in the region. We have become sort of a quick SWAT team for bringing in information and expertise into those crises and serve somewhat as a media resource for those who may not understand the relationship of a healthy and strong environment to protection of our communities. Slide, please. So this America's Energy Coast project that we have created is a part of, it's an initiative of the America's Wetland Foundation, and it has reached out across 5 Gulf states, and I'm going to talk about one project there, and now reaching up into the middle of the country around the Mississippi with the Big River Works project. The task force that we create are issue-based and not necessarily politically based, and they deal with many of the industries and NGO concerns, conservation, landowners, social justice, and environmental justice concerns, landowner rights, agricultural production challenges, and navigation and coastal interests such as seafood production and recreation. We have created networks of local, state, and federal elected officials and administrative officers, so anyone representing an officer or an office on the phone that would like to be part of the Honorary Leadership Council, which is our group of elected and appointed leaders. There's some 250 now members of that. They can get updates and information and be made part of programs as we convene them around the country. Next slide, please. So the way that we bring voice nationally and locally is an industry council. So we have large industries that represent interest along these areas of the coast or the Mississippi Valley as part. I mentioned the Leadership Council, and then we have the various task forces where we create solutions around issues such as climate and greenhouse gas emissions, trying to create innovation in restoration sciences, looking at drought and water access, quality as well as quantity, and convening experts and research leaders so that we can gather what the best thinking is in our programs and release reports which may have been only seen in a silo of interest. So there may be great engineering reports that have only been seen by engineers, or similarly studies that have been conducted on water trapping or sediment reduction that have not really made a broader splash that we can bring and give some voice to, and then pass those kinds of studies and findings, which have cost a lot of money either privately or to the taxpayer, pass that along to the elected and administrative officials in a nonpartisan way. Next slide, please. So the first project I want to mention is a baseline for the second project that I want to talk a little bit about, and it's a project that the America's Wetland Foundation designed with its America's Energy Coast and a series of forums in 11 communities across 5 states in the Gulf, from Florida to Texas. And the purpose of the project was to gain a local voice about what the vulnerabilities are that these communities face and what can be done about it locally, statewide, and nationally, so that we build a set of resiliency opportunities so that these communities can, number one, reduce the cost of growing climate impacts and the change with weather patterns and natural disasters or man-made disasters. And number two, have some stability knowing that they have created a resiliency pattern and share information and best practices with other communities so that the resiliency of the region and thus the insurability of these vulnerable areas can be assured for time to come. If we can go to the next slide. So across the Gulf South, we looked at a number of issues that were raising their head, and many times those of you in state government have heard that, well, we have a project, we funded part of it, but we can't seem to ever get the project finished. It's either in a study phase or it's in a phase where it's moved around agencies who have various jurisdictional points that make these projects very costly to do restoration or sustainability, or make the projects stretch out in a length of time where their effectiveness is somehow impaired. And so in our programs and building off of the Gulf of Mexico Regional Ecosystem Restoration Strategy that was produced by a task force of the federal government, we found a number of items worthy of our focus. And they include everything as you see on the right hand there. The need for an emergency or general rules so that we don't have programs that last 15 and 30 years to do restoration or to do sustainability programming. Cutting the red tape, and not the trite sense of or the rhetorical sense of we got to get the government out of our backyard, the literal sense of conflicting federal policy that makes it difficult to move through the process. And I can give you an example that we have a belief that, you know, no one is the devil in disguise in these agencies that we work with to try to do restoration. But each individual agency, because there's not anyone in charge broadly of water in this country, each individual agency has their authorities laid out in code, and they have to work toward fulfilling their authorities. And it can happen very often, let's say in the loss of wetlands, where one agency is to do the improvement of the wetlands and possibly restore wetlands. And another agency's mission is to protect fish and wildlife. And so you can imagine that when land is lost and water replaces the land, fish and habitat can become present that wasn't there before. And the agencies responsible for that can have a conflict with the agency who has been in process of a permit to go ahead and do this restoration of the land. And so these very basic and nonsensical conflicts have held up millions and millions of dollars worth of projects. There's mitigation programs that the federal government has under Coastal Zone Management Act and others that are very small in nature, maybe project-based mitigation. And we found that if there could be a pooled mitigation where funds are large enough to do wholesale ecosystem restoration, it would be much better use of those dollars. And that's an impediment. We have a Harbor Trust Maintenance Fund that those of you in coastal areas know is supposed to go to support our navigation and free flow of our waterways. And that has been locked up for many years, and there are billions of dollars now that have been locked up because of that these projects don't score well on the Congressional Budget Office pro farmers, and they keep this fund locked up. That what we think is for the major purpose of keeping the budget constraints a little less than they are even today. We've tried to look at carbon issues, and we know that there's been a huge national debate around cap and trade on carbon, but we look at it as when we have carbon present in our atmosphere and we can eliminate greenhouse gases by creating incentives for reuse or recycling or building land that can sequester carbon as a carbon sink, those would be much more profitable in many ways than just having a static credit market that large companies have to participate in. So we're working on some demonstration projects for that carbon. I mentioned environmental mitigation, and we also are looking at no net loss of wetlands, no net loss of culture kinds of programs to put within the body of considerations for permits, so that you can't go and do something by the very nature of what you are doing, whether it be for flood protection or whether it be for navigation or whether it be for permits for use of land in any other way. We don't want that to impede or to hurt the substantial assets that we have in culture and natural resources that exist in these areas that are moving into deplorable state. I mentioned connecting the energy and ecological relationships and removing the burdens that conflicts cause in moving ahead with projects. Quite frankly, to have a strong energy posture for this country, you have to have a strong environment, because where energy is produced requires environmental protections for that complex maze of pipelines and refineries and physical plants and infrastructure and ports that really will support the commerce, but it all depends on a healthy environment and a healthy landscape. And then we are dealing constantly in our disaster areas with FEMA maps and the insurability. As the maps change, populations become uninsurable, and they are required in times based on their inability to afford to stay in a community where possibly they grew up and are forced to retreat. And there needs to be thoughtful consideration about what making whole communities move means to our society. Next slide, please. So we created this project to go into these 11 places in these 5 states, and we wanted to convene these nonpartisan groups, identify the vulnerabilities, bring in unique expertise, honor the core values of a local community or state or region, and then serve as a catalyst for empowerment. We think that the top-down approach from the federal government is not something that really works well because of the diversity of place and kind of people in different parts of our country, and that this is truly one place where federalism needs to play out and a greater balance to programs needs to be created. Next slide, please. So in the forums, to get ready for a forum, we go through a number of opportunities to gain information. The forums that we convened were all research-based, where we did environmental scans, focus groups, individual interviews, and then we created a findings report of what we learned about a local community and fed that back into these leadership sessions. And after the sessions, or during the sessions, we'd come up with recommendations and findings and then publicize that in print and in news cycles, so with advertising, so that the general public could also respond. Next slide, please. And so this program would not have been as successful without leveraging more substantive research that we worked with an energy company in the South to produce a $4.2 million that went zip code by zip code and assessed what was going to happen in the next 30 years in terms of relation to sea level rise and the impact it would have on the built infrastructure from greater and longer lasting storm events and the rising tide that has been fairly well documented with the occasion of sea level rise and climate variations. And so we did these studies, and basically, rather than go through all of these bullets, the studies showed across the 5 states in the Gulf that the economic growth of that region would not keep up or not keep pace with the cost to repair the damage that would be caused by these greater, higher velocity and longer lasting storm events. And you only have to look at the last storm, Isaac, which sat around 2 or 3 states in the Gulf for many, many, many hours and caused huge damage for a Category 1 storm. And that was because the water levels have been rising and moving into areas that they hadn't before. And so in Louisiana, for example, Baton Rouge, Louisiana, becomes a coastal threatened community when it had never thought of itself as being on or near the coast. Next slide, please. The study that we had looked at hazards from wind, sea level rise, and storm surge, and we did overviews of the key risks along the coastline and tried to link them to man-made and hurricane events. But the potential change and the potential that the sea level rise was going to cause in the next 30 years was also assigned to each of these areas, and that's how we came up with our composite. Now, this is really sobering information if you live in the Gulf South, but it's extremely sobering information if you have a relationship to the Mississippi River, because of the demise of the mouth of the river and the channels similar to the Gulf Intercoastal Waterway, which is an east-west route which moves goods and services, commodity, and energy to the river and up the river. This should be of heightened concern to upriver interests who depend on the Mississippi River to import their chemicals and some of their feedstocks and have that transported by river, or vice versa to export the largest agricultural crops and commodities that are created within the central body of the nation. These losses and this continuing hazardous situation is something that is of national concern, and we're trying to do these kinds of briefings so that we can have more people understand the economic and ecological impact that's pretty close to being upon them. Next slide, please. So with our Entergy study, we were able to see what, with an extreme climate scenario by 2030, and what with our current scenario we could expect in terms of losses, and these were in the billions of dollars. And you can see that if you just take the mid-range, you are well above what we are experiencing today. And a point of example here is that we have moved into this this position as a nation where we do consequence planning and we don't do forecasting well anymore. And so we wait for an event to happen, and then we dramatically rush in and try to prove to the American people and the taxpayer that we are good stewards by coming to solve the problem. This is a real, this in and of itself is a huge cost to the taxpayer to wait. In terms of Katrina and Rita hurricanes alone in the South, the federal government and insurance claims have totaled a cost of $140 billion with a B. And the original cost of getting ahead of this act 10 years ago to restore some of these coastal areas that have now been lost, a football field of land every 1 hour is a general estimate of land being lost, the greatest land loss on the planet, has cost the American taxpayers $140 billion, where the estimate to do the front-end repair work in 10 years ago was $14 billion. So any good business person would understand that calculation, and any good government steward would understand that this is money well spent if we get ahead of the game. Now, part of the problem is that our nation, in looking at projects, does cost-benefit analysis, but we don't do liability assessment analysis. In other words, if 40 miles of land is lost in a lower coastal zone, or if the barrier islands are lost, or if the siltation of the Mississippi River is such that it creates a liability and a hazard, how do we put a dollar figure on that? That would have been the $14 billion as opposed to the $140 billion that the taxpayer ultimately paid. But how do we make those calculations? We're using old systems and old standards to do it that just don't work anymore when you have a degrading coast and a degrading stem of the Mississippi River. Next slide, please. So this garbled mess on your screen is what we call the spider web of resiliency. And when I was telling you earlier about us going into the communities and doing assessments and then having the assessments confirmed, the findings confirmed at a leadership forum, these are the way individual communities in our program of resiliency rated themselves. Now this chart and this process was taken from a NOAA-designed project, National Oceanographic Atmospheric Administration, for the tsunami region in the South China Sea. And we have applied a very large tome of information, some 300 or 400 pages, into a shortened Cliff Notes version of the process, where we have learned about each of our communities that are in the coast. As you can see, the society and the economy understanding of its relationship to a healthy coastline is very low. It's almost at the 3-point level in most of these. The risk understanding is very low. The land use and structural design, very low. Coastal restoration and protection, very low. Of disaster recovery and emergency response and warning and evacuation are very high, which is extremely predictable given the current slate of events that we have seen in that region. So you can look at this for each of the communities and then as a total view of resiliency for the entire Gulf of Mexico coast and see that this whole resiliency web, if filled out, would be a complete dot, but we're far from there. And everywhere that this is lower denotes an area of extreme cost to the taxpayer and to the look at future costs that could impact the economy and the actual survivability of communities in the region. Next slide, please. Now, we took the findings I had said to Washington last month, and you can download a free copy of these findings in what we have called Beyond Unintended Consequences. We know from our studies and our review of literature that in the 1890s, the federal government, when they levied the Mississippi River for flood protection and navigation purposes, cut off the natural flow of the river and the building effort of the river in the lower ends of the river delta. And that began a slow process of the delta dying. And when you have one section, one large section of a river system dying, there's only a matter of time until it infects the rest of the system and renders it in a deplorable state, which we're starting to find now. And so we realized that we called this beyond unintended consequences because everyone says that, well, to do this, it had an unintended consequence of that. But in fact, in a National Geographic article back in the 1800s, it was pretty well laid out in the article that knowing the government was knowingly putting these barriers, and which we call levees, which would put the nutrients and sediments out and create a dead zone, a toxic zone in the Gulf and along some of the river reaches where there are small toxic pockets. And it would also levy off the sediments and nutrients to continue building the delta. Now, that old story in National Geographic, sort of insinuated that, well, the next generation will come along and fix that, but for now we have to worry about our flood protection, which was probably the truth due to the and certainly came true in the 1927 floods, which were the Great Floods. But what we have now done is kill off almost an entire delta and the upper reaches of the river with trapping and sediment control devices, and the lack of building in some of the industries and economic forces into the solution. And we've had an encouragement by the federal government for greater agriculture production and greater production of corn for ethanol, and those runoffs have become something of a debate now and led themselves even to a lawsuit being filed in Illinois. And so we feel that if you get into the position of having to deal with the river in terms of just litigation, we won't have a cooperative opportunity to fix and create solutions for some of the problems. Next slide, please. So the recommendations that you will see when you download the report are resolving these conflicting federal policies and practices and seeking an urgency to action because we are losing and quickly running out of time. If you look at that 30-year projection of the turnaround of the economic impact. Second slide, please. Deploying multiple lines of defense and offense, which is decreasing regional vulnerabilities through cooperative action. There are things that can be done to make sure that we go long-term thinking and system thinking, like mitigation funds and the use of adaptation measures from the individual all the way up to the federal government, so that we create incentives for adaptation and create programs that allow states some ways in which they can do comprehensive planning with their partner states who are contiguous to some of their coastal or waterway resources. Next slide. We definitely think that in this period of low financed federal projects that we have to allow innovation and enterprise to flourish. There are so many barriers that industry won't start playing in this game right now, and even research institutes are having trouble finding monies for R&D to come up with new ways and new plans to harness the power of technology. And so we're very much for a research-based and science-based effort. We're very much in combining up until now siloed industries such as engineering with science, so that we have scientific engineering solutions which make sense to a landscape which cannot singularly have one silo that controls its future. Next slide, please. We also want to revitalize and strengthen local voice and empower pride in the region, because if there is no sense of self-determination, if everyone is waiting for the federal government to have an answer, I think we've seen in the last decade that the federal government has turned into more of a response mechanism than in politically charged discussions, a place where unfunded mandates may be coming down, and the states have the barrel that they have to fill with the funds to impact what the federal government has said rhetorically as some of the solutions. So we need common sense solutions based on not only cost benefit, but what the liabilities will be to our communities if we don't empower ourselves with knowledge and understanding as how to avoid at the local level up to the high levels the way to have a sustainable coast and a Mississippi region. And then one more slide, please. And then we need to broadcast the findings such as the report unintended consequences. We need people to understand it's complex, but that some of these solutions really don't require huge federal change. Some could be executive change, some could be legislatively driven, but some can come from us cooperating with each other. The extent to which, as I mentioned at the very early part of this, we don't have a formal agreement or a cooperative accord among the states of the Mississippi Valley is really endangering our ability to be a player at the national level with funds that are coming from many different agencies for many different things. And we always liken it to being on the menu if we're not at the table. And right now, our states that are in the midst of the Mississippi River deterioration and the Delta deterioration are somewhat on the menu of large national forces that are finding ways to support other places around the country. But this prime economic driver is really in trouble. And early cooperation among the states is something we really propose. And next slide, please. So I mentioned that we're looking at trying to elevate our Mississippi ecosystem and river and delta to an international stage, because there are people very concerned that these working deltas and working rivers are in such a state that they could impact the world economy. And we've chosen as a partner the Mekong Delta, and but you can see the other red dots there, places where you have extreme problems in the Ganges and the Nile. Some of these are hot spots internationally. The Mekong Delta particularly, I think, is seen by our federal military as sort of a security region with China's growth, and have made moves to really work with the Vietnamese, Thai, Cambodian, Lao governments to secure a more sustained Mekong River. And we want to make sure that as we go to secure any other parts of the world, that we do the same on our homeland. Next slide, please. So the timeline for the America's Wetland Foundation, we finished in 2010 and 11 the Blue Ribbon Resilient Program. So we have a base of knowledge about what it takes to have a resilient community that can be portable to other communities up and down the Mississippi Basin. We have started our Big River Works program, and we've had one of our programs, the Launch Program in New Orleans, and now we're going to communities up the river. We're working on a coastal sustainability program for the state of Texas with a master plan in development similar to Louisiana's. We will be on the international stage to talk about the Mississippi watershed with our hosting of the Vietnam program, and we'll do that with the governments of the Netherlands and Australia, Germany, and certainly our own embassy there, and the Vietnam National University and some of the governmental agencies in Vietnam. The World Bank and the World Wildlife Fund, the Nature Conservancy, and other NGOs and foundations. And then we will begin to work, as this conversation lays the groundwork, for synergy for policy and practice and cooperation in the region. And how that results, we're not sure, but we have some ideas. If you go to the next slide, please. Our Big River Leadership Forums are designed to tease out some ways in which we can move toward a more sustainable Mississippi ecosystem for the 31 states in the United States. And we're going to focus this discussion on 5 areas: sediment flow, nutrients, and the presence of nutrients and their debilitating effect on the system, hydrology of the river system, the connectivity of the various river and tributaries to each other and the ecosystem services they provide, and the management of species so that we do not have a huge negative loss due to invasive species within the river and its tributaries. All of those items I mentioned, we will seek in these river meetings to talk about alterations necessary to fill the gap of what we have and to what we would hope to have within the next 10 years. And underlying that discussion is a discussion about cooperation and what ways can we formally cooperate among our states, because in the federalist system you must have formal agreements among the states to have a sustainability of an entire ecosystem. Next slide, please. So our goal is to connect the Delta to the Mississippi River system, outreach to the 31 states, have widespread media management for these wetland and ecosystem issues, and we want to engage youth with restoration and create a balanced voice. Actually, I would say create a voice for the region itself. And when I say region, it's the Mississippi ecosystem as a region. Next slide. Here's some statistics about how important this area is. It's probably the #1 priority that the nation should focus on, but as you know, the way Congress works, we take budgets and we spread it out by seniority in congressional and senatorial areas, and rarely take into account what the downfall could be if we do not prioritize some of these regions. And that list is some of the prioritizations that we think are justified. Next slide. You can see the program outlay and schedule for the Big River Works programs. If you're anywhere near Memphis, October 17th, St. Louis, December 6th, Minneapolis-St. Paul, January 17th, or in Chicago, the 26th and 27th of February. Like probably most of the people on this phone, we pick places when the hotel rates are cheapest so that we can get there and have a decent program, but not spend the summer rates. But these programs are open to you or your representatives to attend, and you just merely need to go to the website to do that. Next slide, please. As was mentioned, Pat Quinn, the governor of Illinois, and Lieutenant Governor Jay Dardenne of Louisiana are co-chairing this project, and there is a huge list, if you'll change the slide, of our steering committee, which is helping to make this possible. And people from all walks of life, everything from culture to the environmental sciences to industry, and in large NGOs and government representatives are on this steering committee. Next slide. So we encourage your involvement. We hope this is interesting to you. You can become part, if you're an elected or an appointed official of the leadership committee, and serve on the steering committees, attend the meetings, contribute testimony. If you know of research that has been done, we can make it a part of the official record. Next slide. So this is how you can reach me with the email americaswetland@mcopr.com. You can go to the Foundation's website and see all of what I have discussed, as well as a lot more information in depth about some of these issues and references and leaders and experts that you might want to work out to. I would close by saying that we have not much time left. The chairman of our foundation says that in the last 10 years since we've started, we've lost so much land that we're not at a place where we can restore the land, but only the values of the land. And we're quickly moving that way with the Mississippi system, where there is a real challenge to navigation that we've seen recently with siltation. We have a drought challenge. We have water access and water quality challenges, and states are starting to have what has been rhetorically referred to as water wars with each other. We need to avoid all of this and be smarter about it, try to move it out of the realm of partisan politics so that we don't have the toxicity within the discourse of the solutions that we do in the system itself. So with that, I'll open it up to questions. I think we've allowed 15 minutes and appreciate those of you who had to listen through this.
Val, thanks so much. This is Brad here at CSG. We really appreciate a really eye-opening presentation and engaging as well, and startling in some respects too. Yeah, this first question may already have been answered, but we want to be sure I got it out there. The folks are asking how they can get a copy of the adaptation study you mentioned at the beginning. Is that all at the American Wetlands website, or should they go to the future of the Gulf Coast.com? What would be the best place to go?
Yeah, the americaswetland.com website. It's both, and the futureofthegulf.com as well. So those are two places that are easily downloadable versions. They're connected, so both websites will point you to the report.
Okay. Well, I know you mentioned before, you talked earlier about some of the drought issues, especially that were still are making headlines all across the Mississippi River watershed and the impact it has to agriculture, but also what are some of the downstream components involved with things like hypoxic dead zones in the Gulf. And I know, I guess NOAA has forecasted that the dead zone is a little smaller this year than it has been in years past. Do you think this means that things are improving, or is that more of a correlation to maybe of the drought conditions, or what are some of the factors behind that?
Yeah, the dead zone is larger when you have more runoff and higher water levels in the river, and so that water and nutrients are jettisoned into the Gulf. When you're in a drought or low water level season, the hypoxia zone will always be smaller. And it's a direct result of the nutrient runoff from agricultural lands, large communities, paved environments where the industrial and community runoff is greatly exacerbated.
I wanted to back up a little bit and maybe ask a more fundamental question about the Big River Works initiative. There's a lot of states involved. There's some 31 states and 2 Canadian provinces. And your goal is pretty ambitious. How do you plan on working to get all these states to come together and develop an accord on a larger scale?
I think what we're doing in this year and into 2013 is to create a framework of what we call those aspects that I was mentioning that impact the health of the river, so that we can see what potential cooperation, what points of cooperation there could be. So we're doing that homework really so that the states then can have an opportunity to begin calling sessions with their authority, which we don't have, to look at where those areas of cooperation lie and begin working on them. Quite frankly, an accord can be inspired by what we're doing, but we don't have the authority to make an accord happen. It's going to have to be the states that then pick up the ball. And that could happen in individual state agencies that want to push cooperation because they know that they could have a better outcome. It could be in the legislatures that bills could be put in to form a cooperative. I would say at first it would be a cooperative study group, which may lead to a cooperative accord or MOU, which would ultimately lead to a Mississippi Ecosystem Compact.
Yeah, on that, the state of Kentucky and Indiana and Ohio, I know, have come together a few months ago to do a nutrient management cap and trading program, basically, for nutrients along the Ohio River. I didn't know if maybe that would be something that either has been discussed in your forums or would be a part of, maybe as an example, of some state solutions there. I know that that program was developed on a large stakeholder basis. I didn't know if that was something you guys have followed, or you have any comments there.
We have followed it, but we would very much like if you guys have people who speak to the relationship and the outcomes of the study. We do, a couple of states have moved into looking at nutrient tax credits, nutrient credits, similar to cap and trade. And so anything we can add to the record or have people present, we're more than welcome to include them.
Okay. And I guess maybe back to a larger question, and then maybe we can wrap here, unless there's some other discussion points we need to, our callers or participants want to flesh out. It seems that this is such a large river system with so many different stakeholders and different factors. I mean, what really can policymakers do help improve the health of the river now, outside of some of these forms and suggestions? Are the things, you mentioned some recommendations before. Do you think those recommendations from your earlier studies, especially on the energy coast, are applicable here to Big River?
Yeah, a lot of them are. There needs to be, at the federal level, immediate agency cooperation, I think, to focus on what the key aspects of alterations should be. Once we know how to alter nutrients or sediments or the hydrology issues in a positive way, working together with these agencies, then we have to be able to move to do it. And right now there is not in place such a large authority to allow this to happen. You have authorities in EPA, Fish and Wildlife, Corps of Engineers, Agriculture, others that need to be able to work together, but the impetus for doing that is not there. It would be really a shame, and it's happening right now, to allow the river to deteriorate because it's such a large issue. Once we reach the point of no return in some of those aspects that we were talking about, the cost is going to be astronomical, or it's going to require a change of life in commerce. And those costs have not, I can tell you, been evaluated in any way, shape, or form, and what impacts and changes it will require to society have not been calculated. The rise in agricultural costs, the rise in the cost of energy, the lack of moving to more carbon-centered transportation modes than shipping. Those are enormous considerations that we could get ahead of right now, but we're not doing it.
Well, Val, I want to thank you again today for your remarks and your insight. I've learned a lot, and I want to remind all of our participants that we'll have the webinar on CSG's website Knowledge Center soon. But if you have any follow-up questions, I'd urge you to get in touch directly with Val, or email me as well at bross@csg.org. I'll be happy to forward along any questions you may have for Val that you didn't get a chance to ask today. But also, I wanted to let everyone know that our national meeting is coming up soon in Austin, November the 30th through December 3rd. And the early registration hotel cutoff deadline is October the 19th. So that's coming up soon. And if you're making your travel plans, I'd urge you to do it now. And also, we'd like to see you at our Energy and Environmental Task Force session we're going to have on December 2nd. We'll have a working breakfast early at 8 a.m. We'll go to 10, but we've got an exciting array of speakers there and hope you could join us. With that, we'll go ahead and bring today's event to a close. But again, I want to thank Val for his presentation today.
Thank you.
And your attention. Val, any closing thoughts you want to share?
No, just thank you, and I really appreciate CSG focusing on these issues. It's how when you asked how can we start, this is how we start. So good luck to you. Austin's a great place for a conference, and we look forward to working with you in the future.
Likewise. Hey, thanks so much today. Okay, bye-bye.